Good Tuesday morning, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for February the 21st. Today, we are reading together in Genesis chapter 8, which is going to include the details of plagues 2, 3, and 4 of God's assault against Egypt and Pharaoh and their gods. Here, the Lord is going to continue to give Pharaoh the opportunity to make a good decision, and he makes bad decisions, and great consequences come as a result of those bad decisions. Let's read about that together here in Genesis chapter 8. Get the text up on the screen for us to read together here. Genesis chapter 8 and verse number 1. Of course, this is coming after plague number 1, where God turned the water into blood, and and as the song goes, they could not take a drink of the water, and they had a hard time finding stuff to drink at this time. And eventually the water, it seems, turns back, or the blood turns back into water after 7 days. And now Moses is going to approach Pharaoh again on behalf of Yahweh and make the request to let his people go. Let's read about that together here in in Exodus chapter 8, verse number 1. Then the Lord said to Moses, Yahweh said to Moses, "Go into Pharaoh and tell him, this is what Yahweh says, let my people go, so that they may worship me. But if you refuse to let them go, then I will plague all your territory with frogs. The Nile will swarm with frogs. They will come up and go into your palace, into your bedroom, and on your bed, into the houses of your officials and your people, and into your ovens and kneading bowls. The frogs will come up on you, your people, and all your officials." Yahweh then said to Moses, "Tell Aaron, stretch out your hand with your staff over the rivers, canals, and ponds, and cause the frogs to come up onto the land of Egypt." When Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt, the frogs came up and covered the land of Egypt. But the magicians did the same thing by their occult practices and brought frogs up onto the land of Egypt. Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, "Appeal to Yahweh to remove the frogs from me and my people. Then I will let the people go and they can sacrifice to Yahweh." Moses said to Pharaoh, "You may have the honor of choosing. When should I appeal on behalf of you, your officials, and your people, that the frogs be taken away from you and your houses and remain only in the Nile?" "Tomorrow," he answered. Moses replied, "As you have said, so that you may know that there is no one like Yahweh our God. The frogs will go away from you, your houses, your officials, and your people. The frogs will remain only in the Nile." After Moses and Aaron went out from Pharaoh, Moses cried out to Yahweh for help concerning the frogs that he had brought against Pharaoh. And Yahweh did as Moses had said. The frogs in the houses, courtyards, and fields died. They piled them in countless heaps, and there was a terrible odor in the land. But when Pharaoh saw there was relief, he hardened his heart, and he would not listen to them as Yahweh had said. Then Yahweh said to Moses, "Tell Aaron, stretch out your staff and strike the dust of the land, and it will become gnats throughout the land of Egypt." And they did this. Aaron stretched out his hand and his staff, and when he struck the dust of the land, gnats were on people and animals. All the dust of the land became gnats throughout the land of Egypt. The magicians tried to produce gnats using their occult practices, but they could not. The gnats remained on people and animals. "This is the finger of God," the magician said to Pharaoh. But Pharaoh's heart was hard, and he would not listen to them as Yahweh had said. Yahweh said to Moses, "Get up early in the morning and present yourself to Pharaoh. When you see him going out to the water, tell him, this is what Yahweh says, let my people go, so that they may worship me. But if you will not let my people go, then I will send swarms of flies against you, your officials, and your people, and your houses. The Egyptian houses will swarm with flies, and so will the land where they live. But on that day I will give special treatment to the land of Goshen, where my people are living. No flies will be there. This way you will know that I, Yahweh, am in the land. I will make a distinction between my people and your people. This sign will take place tomorrow. And Yahweh did this. Thick swarms of flies went into Pharaoh's palace and his officials' houses. Throughout Egypt, the land was ruined because of the swarms of flies. Then Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, "Go sacrifice to your God within the country." But Moses said, "Well, it would not be right to do that, because what we will sacrifice to Yahweh our God is detestable to the Egyptians. If we sacrifice what the Egyptians detest in front of them, won't they stone us? We must go a distance of 3 days into the wilderness and sacrifice to Yahweh our God as he instructs us." Pharaoh responded, "I will let you go and sacrifice to Yahweh your God in the wilderness, but don't go very far. Make an appeal for me. As soon as I leave you," Moses said, "I will appeal to Yahweh, and tomorrow the swarms of flies will depart from Pharaoh, his officials, and his people. But Pharaoh must not act deceptively again by refusing to let the people go and sacrifice to Yahweh." Then Moses left Pharaoh's presence and appealed to Yahweh. And Yahweh did as Moses had said. He removed the swarms of flies from Pharaoh, his officials, and his people. No, not one was left. But Pharaoh hardened his heart this time also and did not let the people go. Exodus chapter 8. All right, looking at this text again, plagues 2, 3, and 4. What we're going to see in plague number 2 is the first of 4 plagues that are going to involve animals. And there is I can't remember if I mentioned this in our previous reads or not, but there is an element here in which God is taking the creation narrative and the themes of creation and reversing them in these plagues. What he did in creation is he took chaos and he brought order to chaos. He ordered this world and this creation in the way that was good and worked well. And part of that order was for humans to have dominion and have rule over the created animals. But here, what we're seeing in these three plagues, and also plague number 8, is that here the animals are going to have, in a sense, dominion over the people, and they are going to cause chaos for the people of Egypt. So what do we see here going on with this second plague? Well, number 1, God sends Moses to warn Pharaoh, to give him another chance. Hey, let my people go. But I'm telling you, if you refuse to do this, if you don't do what I'm telling you to do, then I will bring the frogs. The frogs will come. The Nile will swarm with frogs. They'll come into your palace, your bedroom, your bed, the houses, all the people, the ovens, the kneading bowls, everything. You will be overcome with these frogs. And that certainly would cause a great deal of trouble for the people. Sanitation issues. There would certainly be just destruction that would take place because of all this. People won't be able to live their lives in a normal way whatsoever. Life would just be totally disrupted by these frogs. So Yahweh goes to Moses and tells Aaron that if this doesn't happen, what you're going to do is you're going to lift up your staff and you're going to lift it over the rivers and the canals and the ponds, and boom, here come the frogs. Here comes the frogs, and they are going to overtake all of Egypt. Now, what's interesting is that the magicians in verse number 7 are told that they can do the same thing, but this is the last time that we see this happening. But one other question is why? Like, what does it accomplish for the magicians to multiply frogs as well? Don't they have enough frogs as it is? Well, they do, and now they have more. Some suggest this is kind of a humorous thing that happens. I don't know exactly what to do with this. This just seems like a very useless thing for the magicians to do. Nonetheless, I do want to note that you would think what would be good for them to do would be to get rid of the frogs. Instead of multiply the frogs and add frogs, they want to get rid of frogs. They can't do that. All they're able to do is multiply them. So who does Pharaoh have to call? He has to call Moses, who he has to beg to appeal to Yahweh on his behalf so that the frogs will go away. He knows that Yahweh is the one that can make this happen. He has the power not only to produce the plagues, but he alone also has the power to take the plagues away. And then he lies and says, hey, if you do this, then I'll let the people go and I'll let them sacrifice to the Lord. Moses steps up here and does some more speaking. And from this point on, we're going to see him do more speaking. Aaron will still be used and seems to speak in some places, but it seems as if Moses' role is going to increase while Aaron's is going to decrease, at least in the way the narrative reads. So Moses says, hey, I'll let you choose when this will happen. Pharaoh says tomorrow, or there's translation variances there. That might also mean as soon as possible. Whatever it is, Moses confirms that Yahweh is going to take care of this, and you need to know, based upon him sending the plagues and sending the frogs and taking the frogs, and really expanding out the purview from him sending the plagues and taking away the plagues, you will know that there is no one like Yahweh, our God. And that's important to recognize here, because Yahweh is bigger than the gods of Egypt, and he will unleash the forces and the power of creation to really drive this point home. He is going to unleash the water into blood, and the frogs and the gnats and the flies and everything that's a part of this creation that he can use to his benefit. He's going to use here. And Pharaoh, him thinking that he himself is a deity, and the gods that back him and that he thinks that have power here, God's going to show you have no power here whatsoever. So that's what they do. The Lord takes away the frogs, and the way he does that, he simply kills them, and they die. So they have to pile up in countless heaps. The text says in verse 14 of chapter 8 of Exodus that there was a terrible odor in the land, which echoes what we see in chapter 7 and verse 21, that there was a stench of death that was found within Egypt. The fish in the Nile died, and the river smelled so bad the Egyptians could not drink the water from it. So again, here, what God is bringing is death to the Nile, which, remember, so much of this is predicated upon the reversal of what Pharaoh tried to do before. He tried to use the Nile as a tool of death against the Jews in exterminating the male children. But here is God reversing that and now using it as a tool of death against the pharaohs. So that's the second plague, the plague of frogs. And once again, Pharaoh's heart is hardened at the end of that section. The third plague that takes place of gnats is different. It's very short. So there's no introduction. It just happens. And this is going to be the last time that Aaron is highlighted again, as I mentioned earlier, in these plague descriptions. Yahweh tells Moses, tell Aaron to stretch out your staff and strike the dust, and it will become gnats. Throughout the entire land of Egypt, they did this. The gnats came, they're on the people, they're on the animals, all the dust became gnats throughout all the land of Egypt. And I want to note verse 18, the magicians tried to produce gnats using their occult practices, but they could not. I wonder why. One writer suggests that if there were evil spiritual forces backing the Egyptians, then what was the thing that Egypt really had going for them was the Nile and water. And both of the first two plagues used water. They used the water turned to blood. They used the water to produce the frogs. Here, there's no water involved. It's dust. It's the earth. And they can't reproduce. Why? Because maybe that's where the limitation of the power of these wicked forces is. But God, once again, the whole issue here is God showing himself to be greater than anything else. Whether it be Pharaoh, whether it be evil spiritual forces, they have limitations. God does not. So in this chapter, he's going to show again, he's going to use water to his advantage. He's going to show power over water. He's going to show power over the earth and the dust. He's going to show power over the air with the flies in the next plague. And that just shows, again, his ability to ability to not be stopped by anything. He has no limitations. And here's the thing, the magicians recognize this because they say, well, this is the finger of God. This is too big for us. We can't do anything about it. And once again, Pharaoh's heart is hardened, just as Yahweh had said. And what's interesting about this is that there's no cessation of this plague. It doesn't end. There's nothing said about its ending. So maybe does that mean that it was longer lasting than the other ones? Some writers suggest that's the case, that these flies would have, or excuse me, these gnats would have continued to be among the Egyptians, just as the sixth plague, boils. They say that might have continued as well. There is a pretty decent pattern within these plagues. They break up into three groups of three, with the final 10th plague being the penultimate plague. They go 1, 2, 3, and then 4, 5, 6, and then 7, 8, 9, and they follow a pretty good pattern. I might put together this table that I found in one resource and share it with you, and I'll read tomorrow. I didn't do that for today. I might do that for tomorrow if I can remember. But with plagues 3 and 6, doesn't talk about their cessation at all. That's very interesting. And it doesn't with 9 either, but there's also not another full section to follow after 9. So take that for what it's worth. There's just no end. There's no at least detailed end to this particular plague, as there are with the majority of the other ones. Verse number 20 brings about the fourth plague, the swarms of flies. And this is interesting. I really appreciate this note from one resource. The Lord is really, once again, giving Pharaoh a chance to make a decision here. He can make a good choice or a bad choice. He's going to make a bad choice. Tell Pharaoh, this is what Yahweh says: let my people go so that they may worship me. But if you will not let my people go, then I will send swarms of flies against you and everybody. Basically, there's a play on words here. There is the Hebrew word that is translated let and go, that's found in verse 20 and 21, and also the send in verse 21. That's all the same Hebrew word. The Hebrew word is shelach, and that word means to send and go. So it's basically, God is basically saying, send my people away so I don't have to send the flies. But if you do not send my people away, then I will send the flies. And that's exactly what he does. He sends the flies, and flies, once again, are everywhere. But within this particular plague, there is a detail given that it would not bother, these flies would not bother the land of Goshen. There is a delineation between your people, Pharaoh, and my people. My people I care for. My people I'm going to protect. My people I'm going to deliver. But your people, no, your people are going to suffer. And they're going to suffer because of your decision making. So in verse number 24, this is exactly what God did. He sent these flies all over Pharaoh's palace, all over the land of Egypt, everything. They're all just getting swarmed by the flies. And so Pharaoh does what he does. He summons Moses and Aaron, go sacrifice to your God within the lands. But here's Moses' reply. Remember, Pharaoh's saying, stay here and go ahead and make your sacrifices that you're wanting to make. But Moses here says, well, it would not be right to do that, because what we will sacrifice to Yahweh our God is detestable to the Egyptians. You know, is he doing just some political diplomacy here? I don't think that's the case at all. And what does it mean that what we will sacrifice to the Lord our God is detestable to the Egyptians? Is it the sacrifices themselves, or is it the purpose of the sacrifices? I think it's more so the purpose of the sacrifices. That what we will sacrifice, the fact that we will be sacrificing to Yahweh, would be detestable to these paganistic people. In fact, the only offerings that are appropriate would be to you and the Egyptian gods. So if we do this, the Egyptians will detest us, and they'll kill us for worshiping a god that is not their own. So there's some sparring that goes on between Pharaoh and Moses here. And Moses is clever. Moses doesn't give in to this. He says, hey, you're just trying to get us killed. And we recognize that, and that's not going to happen. No, if we're going to sacrifice to Yahweh, then you've got to send us away the 3 days, like we said, so that we can sacrifice to him there. So Pharaoh responds at verse 28, well, I'll let you go and sacrifice to the Lord your God in the wilderness, but don't go very far. Make an appeal for me. So it's just bad faith bargaining here. He continues to make all these promises. He doesn't follow through with them, as we're going to see throughout the narrative. But here, Moses doesn't even give what he says here a good response. This is what he says, though. He says, as soon as I leave you, I will appeal to Yahweh, and tomorrow the swarms of flies will depart from you and everybody. But do not act deceptively again. Do not act deceptively again by refusing to let the people go and sacrifice to Yahweh. He's warning him ahead of time. Don't be deceitful. We've seen what you've done so far. You need to cut it out. You need to be a person of your word. And of course, Pharaoh's not going to be, but Moses is. So Moses does what he says. He goes to Yahweh. He appeals to him. And again, God's great power is seen not only in sending the flies, but also taking the flies away. Yet Pharaoh's heart is hardened this time also, and he did not let the people go. So that's plagues 2, 3, and 4. Again, here is God showing his power through the water, through the land, through the sky, and he can send everything he wants to. He can take everything away whenever he wants to, and no one can do anything about it. No one can do anything about it. Pharaoh cannot stop. Pharaoh is at the mercy of Yahweh, and he's beginning to recognize that. The magicians recognize that. This is the finger of God. Now, whether that's referring to the finger of Yahweh himself or just the finger of the gods generally, we don't know for certain. There's some ambiguity there. But they recognize this is something too big for them. And Pharaoh needs to recognize this is something too big for him. His pride needs to be defeated. Unfortunately, his heart is hardened, and God's going to use that to his advantage. Once again, a big part of this text is what we see in verse number 10. As you have said, so that you may know there is no one like Yahweh our God. All this is taking place. So they will see the strong hand of God, and they will know there is truly no one like him. We'll be back at it again tomorrow, reading in chapter 9, which is going to have the 5th plague, the 6th plague, the 7th plague, and I think that concludes, chapter 9 is 5, 6, and 7, death of livestock, boils, and hail. That's what we'll look at tomorrow. Hope that you can tune in then. Thanks so much for taking some time to read along with me today. Sorry about the video for yesterday not getting pushed to Facebook for some reason. I will double check to make sure that does not happen for today. Again, thanks so much for tuning in, and have a great Tuesday, everyone. Take care, and God bless.